I think we're ready to go. We're on the top of the hour here. Okay, well, hello everyone. My name's Troy Lanigan. I'm president of the Pennings Center, and we are going through a name change, and there'll be more about that in the weeks and months that follow. We are starting these exchange calls. This is the second one we're doing. We did the first one on Tuesday. And the exchange calls, we're going to try 2 a month. One is based on issues, which are public policy issues. We did on Tuesday the case for freedom and free markets in unfree time, for those of you that might be joining us a second time that participated on Tuesday. And these are action calls, and that is getting some experts together to give you as movement leaders, heads of organizations, involved with organizations in different aspects, helpful ideas, to give you and your organizations the best chance of success. So I'm going to talk to these folks that we have joining us today for about 45 minutes or so, probably 40. We'll see how the time goes, and then we'll take some questions for you. You will see at the bottom of your page a Q&A session. Click that, ask the question, and we have our friend Colin Craig from secondstreet.org. He'll be collecting questions, seeing if there's some common themes, and then we'll call on Colin a bit later to ask those questions and get some feedback from our folks that are with us today. I want to thank the three of you gentlemen for joining us. Michael Davis from Responsive Marketing Group, who for the time I was many years with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we did a lot of fundraising work with his company in Toronto. Ray Pennings, many of you will know, is with Cardus, which does a lot of work and is a leading organization in the movement. And finally, my friend Kevin Gentry with the Koch company's public sector has done a lot of different projects. I go back to 1990. I worked with Kevin in Virginia with the Leadership Institute. And I have to say, Kevin, you've been a bit of an inspiration for all of this, because I've been coming to your exchange calls over the last number of years, and it's inspired what I want to do here with these in Canada. So thank you for that. And you notice we've actually stolen the name exchange calls. So
I probably stole it from somebody else. Plagiarism's a sincere form of flattery, right?
That's right. So what I'm going to do is I've got some questions we sent out to these folks in advance. I'm going to direct them to each person. Then I'm going to ask if others have comments to come in on them. So we'll just jump right into it. And the first question is, what are 1 or 2 of the main challenges or opportunities? There's probably been more challenges than opportunities for either your own organization or client organization that you've discovered during this time, and how has it been addressed? And that's a natural question to go to Michael first, because he's deals with so many clients in this field.
Okay, so I'll start with the challenge. So obviously, at the beginning of March, we were dealing with a situation that as if you watch CNN, they'll tell you every 5 minutes, this is an unprecedented situation, right? So there was no playbook, right? So that was the biggest challenge. Everybody was looking at this and saying, oh my goodness, what are we supposed to do during a pandemic where we have a 24-hour news cycle, right? Where it's coronavirus all the time. People are concerned about their health, concerned about their jobs, concerned about their financial security. And what are you supposed to do during this? And that the challenge was figuring it out, and about what's appropriate. And so I think that our clients ranged, the majority, were in a position where they needed to continue to fundraise, but there was huge hesitancy about not sounding tone deaf, right? Especially with an organization that has nothing to do with fighting coronavirus and helping people who are vulnerable and being affected economically by this. So the first challenge that we had was, what's the right strategy on how to deal with this? Because there was no playbook, right? A few of our clients, we probably have close to 150 different clients across North America. And a few of our clients, they just said, you know what, we're stopping fundraising until this is over, right? And I said, well, it's probably not going to be over until there's a vaccine. But at this point, at that point when it first launched, right? We had some clients who were hesitant to do anything. They just said, we're stopping to see how this plays out because we're concerned. We had other clients who did proceed ahead, but still the challenge was feedback, and because they did get there was some people who definitely were, whenever you do a direct mail campaign, an email, a telephone call, there's always going to be some people who complain, but the nature of the complaint was different in nature. It wasn't, you're calling me too much, you're mailing to me too often, you're constantly emailing. It wasn't a complaint like that. It was, how dare you, during a pandemic, ask me for money, right? So the nature of the complaint, that was a challenge in how to deal with that. So I will flip it around and talk really fast about an opportunity that we did with a couple of our clients. We took this as an opportunity to build community. I went to some of our clients and we said, look, you truly are, and this is really relevant for the conservative movement. We really are a community we really are a conservative movement, and we are a community. And what happens when there's a tragedy, or what happens when there is a big challenge, right, is that a community draws together. And so we started to do messaging campaigns where we were focused on saying, we're a community. As our donors, you've always been there for us, and we're going to be there for you. We had a variety. We had some of our clients who were just reaching out on the phone and through email to people, just asking how they're doing, right? And making sure that people are okay. I have clients who actually know, who are seniors. They know that. And we're specifically focusing on seniors to reach out to them and make sure that they were helped, and see if they could help them. But the opportunity, and later on I'll talk about another example with some of our political clients, our political parties, and what we did to build on that community and how to turn it around. And I will talk about that. But this has been a huge opportunity to build community and reach out and enhance that relationship that you have with your donors and members.
I'll put that same question to you, Kevin.
Sure thing, and thanks very much for having me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a big fan of Troy's, and yes, we've known each other for 30 years since he introduced me to Bill Vanderzam and brought Morton Blackwell and several of my colleagues and me out to Victoria and as well as Vancouver, and we did some training programs. I think actually came back out to Calgary and other places too. So thank you, and Toronto even. So thank you for all of that. Agree with Michael on almost everything here. In fact, I'm not sure I disagree with him on anything. And maybe just to reinforce some of those key points, Michael, that you said, if you think about what we typically have called the marketing framework, and for us, I think an even better framework is Von Mises' model of human action. The human action model says, in order for someone to take action, there are three conditions that have to be met. You all know that. Number one is a dissatisfaction with the current state. Something about a looming threat or a problem creates enough restless unease that you want to do something. The second is, of course, the vision of a better life. What is it we're trying to move towards? What would the solution be to this problem? But even more so, what would be the consequences of that solution? And then the third is the path to get there. How are you providing a solution in a way that seems credible and relevant, that has a reasonable shot of getting you to that better spot? And so we think through that all the time. It doesn't have to do with COVID. It's all the time. And a donor, or prospective donor, almost always makes that decision, just as a volunteer activist does, just as a voter does, just as a consumer does, when those conditions are met. And when COVID hit, I think every nonprofit person in the world said, oh my gosh, how is my work going to continue to be seen as relevant? And so you'll remember what happened. We started getting emails from motel chains that we didn't even know existed anymore, that we may have stayed at 20 years ago, that were suddenly sending emails to tell us how concerned we were about our well-being and how relevant they still were. And I think they kind of missed the point about the relevance, as Michael was saying, and it's easy to react to, what are you talking about? But I think the question is, how is our work today still relevant to a problem being addressed? Can we address the contagious nature of COVID? Probably not. But what about growth in government as a result, or regulatory burden, or whatever barriers that may be erected in the process to people being able to flourish? Or what about, economic recovery, getting business back to its rightful role where it creates value for society? All those sorts of things. Then there is the relevance. How do we portray that, and how can we make the difference? And I think that's the key. The other is doing it through different vehicles. Who was even thinking about Zoom 3 months ago? And yet, necessity is the mother of all invention. There's some great innovations that have come out of this already. Fundraisers have been very creative. There are many people who are doing virtual asks. We can get back to that a little bit later, very effectively so. And there's a lot of creative destruction, I hesitate to say, but as always, and I think we're going to see some who actually are very innovative in this space, who are able to do some really great things from the standpoint of fundraising and marketing.
Okay. Ray, did you want to come in on that, or I can?
Yeah, no, I think I sort of agree. There are three things between what Michael and Kevin have said that certainly resonate within our own experience. I think the first thing, in terms of just being sensitive in tone. I know and perhaps my context is slightly different. Cardus relies on about 300 primary donors who provide, 80–90% of our revenue. So it's a manageable list. In the first week, my colleague and I, we called through the top 100 and just listened. And what was interesting is, in the course of that, we were listening to how other people were experiencing it. We were able to help them make connections quite unrelated to what we do as a think tank along the way. But this business person in Calgary had this need or opportunity, and that person in Vancouver, they didn't know each other, but we heard both of those. Able to make tangible sorts of connections just on practical things that aren't core to our mission, but I think communicated to our people as well, that we were listening to them as people, and we understand that in the light of all of the uncertainties and everything else, that 5-year plan that just seemed so amazing in January wasn't quite as in tune with the times right now. And so we spend our time very much listening to them as opposed to selling our product, if you will. I think the second thing that comes out of that, we've actually been quite successful in repositioning some of our projects to the immediate opportunity. We've been doing a lot of work with several governments in terms of the charitable tax credit and how we provide response and support for the charitable sector as a whole. So we redeployed resources immediately to some very short-term issues, and did some policy work that has been well received and is gaining leverage. And we did it in a way in partnership. We brought some people from other think tanks into the process early on, shared it along the way, and our proposals being promoted in a CD Howe thing and in a Chamber of Commerce. And so we built partnerships in that. Don't try to own it yourself, but live the partnership yourself in terms of this. These are times that, and not really worrying about the credit per se to make sure that your name is on everything, just being there and getting it done. And so I think the third thing, it was interesting, Kevin, you talked about people start with dissatisfaction. And certainly the typical way we go at problems is problem to solution. One of the things, because the goalposts were changing so much, I found it more helpful to basically try to reposition conversations to get beyond the problem, which neither the person I was speaking to nor myself, when are we going to be back to normal? What's the economic When we were having these conversations in March and April, we didn't have a clue, and we only have a slightly better clue today to what the real answers. So rather than focus on the dissatisfaction and the speculation, focus on the positive passions. What is there that you hope will come out of there that might make this a better world? And I have focused very much on trying to engage people, number one, to position them to seeing hope and opportunity, as opposed to just the problem and the uncertainty. And there have been some very interesting things that have emerged that are in the process of working themselves into new projects and things that I think are quite exciting.
Hey, Troy, can I jump in on just a quick funny anecdote about Ray was talking about, just listening, being sort of near, dear, and clear to your donors. And we've been trying to do that as well, of course, and sending different email updates. But think about every now and then something that is unconventional that can cut through the clutter. We have 2 red foxes in our backyard that gave birth to 3 kits earlier this year. And I took some little videos on my iPhone of the kits. And I sent 3 of the videos to 3 of my donors I was talking to on a Sunday afternoon. And all 3 of them and their spouses responded in like half an hour. This is great. Keep this kind of stuff coming. So I kept sending them. And I think I still had 100% open rate and conversation rate. And it even prompted one donor to call me the next day to say, hey, I'm really way behind on my giving. I think I need to make my contribution. So you never know. I think look out for those little offspring in the spring of wild animals running around.
Yeah. Yeah, raccoons. It's our backyard. I don't want to take their picture or see them though. They're nuisances. Hey, I want to just thank you for that. I want to just shift gears a little bit because we talked about donors, but let's talk a bit about our organizations. What issues have you come across in terms of morale, managing a team, often during a difficult time, the remoteness of it, all of these things. And I'm actually going to start with you, Ray, because when I called to invite you onto this, you were actually in the process of what I thought was a brilliant story that I hope you can share with everybody. But I'll start with you on this.
Well, the day you called me, we produce a hard copy magazine 4 times a year, and called Comment Magazine. And usually all staff, they're not on the mailing list, they get it at the office, but obviously there was no office to go to. So I got in my car in Hamilton, and I went to my local flower grower, and I bought enough bouquets for all of our staff, and I drove to Ottawa and created a route of everyone's home and just knocked on their door, gave them their hard copy, and spent 10 minutes at the sidewalk with some flowers. I think, and it ties, I think, and I suspect most organizations watching are in a similar boat to Cardus. We're in the knowledge business. And, good ideas, as much as I'd like to flatter myself and think that I go into my office, sit behind my computer, and brilliance exudes, the reality is that most of the insights that come into the various products we do come out of interaction and team collaboration. We miss the water cooler. We miss our lunches together in which we debate with zeal the issues of the day. Often, with unnuanced sort of things that you certainly don't want to put in writing, but that triggers the processes that when we all go to our desks actually produce insightful sort of products along the way. And I think it's very important. One of the things we've done at Cardus is we have our weekly staff call, which is more intense than usual, simply because the informal ways of sharing information are not there when you're not in the office together. We also have a Friday morning coffee break in which the rule is that you can't talk about Cardus. We come up with a topic. 1 week you brought a piece of music and you played the piece of music, and why is this your favorite piece of music? The next week, if you weren't working for Cardus, where are you most likely to work? And we allowed to answer for each other. And but the key is that sort of knowledge work and teamwork happens when people like each other and get along with each other. And we cultivated something that in the office, in 2 months being alone, it's very important that we engage in the sorts of activities that allow us to like each other, to care about each other as individuals. There's no way to replace the in-office camaraderie and insights that come out of a good barn-burning discussion that happens between 3 or 4 of us, and you can't artificially recreate that on 2:30 p.m. with a 45-minute Zoom call. Doesn't work that way. So there's something lost, but we've been very intentional in investing in the soft cultural sort of things, and I think the productivity and morale has been a consequence of that in a positive way.
I know Kevin will have something to say on this, but I want to ask Michael if you wanted to come in on this subject at all.
Okay, well, I mean, I'll talk about it from our perspective, as we're an agency and we're a fairly large company. We have close to 450 employees, full-time employees, and we had 5 offices across Canada, and it was like many companies, when we had to shut down all our offices and transition to work from home, it presented some unique challenges as it related to our clients. So we had to take, close to 300 and some odd of those employees are working in our contact centers. And if you think about the environment in a contact center, there is, the people that work there raising money for our clients, there's always a vibe. There is always energy, and it feeds off each other. And all of a sudden you're now asking people, we have to set up technology, and people were, while they're working with computers, now we had to go to, 300 and some odd different people's homes across the country, and our IT team had to install technology, but now they're working, in a room by themselves, right? It could be their bedroom, right? Or a room by themselves where they're not surrounded, and there's, while we're still able to monitor their work, we're not able to not able to motivate them, and don't get that same level of enthusiasm and interaction they have with their employees. So that's one of the big challenges that we had as an organization to deal with, was from working from home and working with, quote unquote, people who are salespeople, I guess, right? To create an environment where they still felt motivated all the time, and did not, and there's been many unique issues associated with that. So it is a challenge. It's been a challenge for us. One of the benefits we had is we always had some work at home agents. About 20% of our workforce was work at home. So we had figured out some of those issues, but it's one thing to do it with a small group of people who are used to doing it, to throw hundreds of people who've never done this before and try and deal with some of the soft issues associated with working from home in isolation, or frankly, not in isolation, where 2 little kids running around and all kinds of competing interests, and being able to focus and function, and the issues that are associated with not getting that that interaction with other staff that they're used to. So it's been a big challenge for us, but I'm kind of proud of the fact that we have been able to rise to the occasion. And now our 2 offices in Manitoba are starting to open now. And frankly, some of our callers would prefer to stay home, right? Not because of the health issues, but they're actually finding the environment more to their liking. So we have opened, but we're not mandating people to come in. And some of our people are choosing not for safety reasons, but for that reason. So that's our experience as an organization. But I think that there's some lessons there for people, for those listening on the call, right? For that, you need to make sure that your people are motivated, because they are working in a completely different environment than they ever have worked in before.
Kevin, I know you deal with a lot of organizations and their people. What are you finding on this front?
Well, I think we're all zoomed out, that's for sure. And but I think just, however, there's some creative ways to build in some fun. We even had sort of a virtual concert last Saturday night, but people have tried a virtual happy hour, late in the day on Friday, or just even to Michael's point about, kids running around, embrace that and enjoy it. And, people obviously add to kind of crazy backgrounds or go out into the wilderness or whatever they do. But I was just on the line with a colleague who was in northern Montana yesterday, and I don't exactly understand why he was on the call. He was just shivering the whole time. But anyway, that's just trying to build that in as well. And by the way, to Michael's point earlier, I think it was Michael, your point about building community, or this is an opportunity to build community. There's been a lot of literature recently on just so much benefit comes from people are looking for a sense of community, particularly when the institutions of society are so inept at solving problems, and it goes back to old models. And so wherever you can facilitate that sense of community, I think it's really valuable.
There's a global TV reporter out here from the legislature, and he's at home, and every time he reports, he has different pictures of his kids behind him. I don't even know what he's talking about half the time, but I'm always curious what new picture his kids are going to have behind him. It's turned out to be quite clever, actually, and I think people, as you say, look to have some fun as best they can in this time. So I'm going to ask you a question about large dollar fundraising specifically, and then the small dollar stuff. And maybe I'll start with the small dollar stuff. The landscape, direct mail, telemarketing, online. I mean, that's a lot of air, but a lot of ground to cover there. Has that mix sort of changed, up, down, trends? And I think too, have we been overthinking this a bit too much? One of the things I got off one of your calls, Kevin, is never make assumptions about your donors. And this goes for the large dollar stuff and the small dollar stuff too. That was one takeaway from one of your calls. And I've kept that in my head, like, we don't know what our donors are thinking. Who are we to know for certain? So I'll maybe come back to on that point, but I'll start because it is small dollar. Maybe Michael, because you do as much or more than anybody in the country on this for organizations of our thinking. What are your thoughts? How has that landscape changed? How has the mix changed amongst some of those small dollar vehicles that we use to raise our funds? Have we overthought this a little bit too much over this period and into the next couple months while things still settle?
Okay, so just to respond to your comment about that we need to listen to our donors. Whenever I have a client say, I think the donors have donor fatigue. I hear that many times over the years from my clients, and I used to look at them and say, with respect, the only people who could tell me that the donors have donor fatigue are the donors, right? And you know how they're going to tell me? They're not going to tell me with their words. They're going to tell me with their behavior. We're going to watch, okay, that they're complaining more than often than they have been previously. They're unsubscribing from our email list, right? They're not donating as much. They're not donating it as often, right? It's the behavior that will tell us, right, with donor fatigue. And I think that's a good a transition into what's been going on here. So, many of our clients were very, as I said earlier, were very hesitant to fundraise. So what's happening? So the first thing is I wanted to do things where I could, test the water, okay? And as opposed to writing a direct mail piece and mailing it out to the full list of 100,000 people or 10,000 people or 5,000, whatever the mailing is, and not getting much feedback other than, yes or no, and sending a check back in. I wanted to get feedback. So we actually started doing some small testing with the phone and email in small segments to try and test the water and making variations to see what was working. So here's some kind of facts of what our experience has been. So online, I'll start with online, right? We have seen in the beginning, in the early stages of this, after I'll start maybe right when the NBA canceled the season, we'll say that's the first day of the pandemic, back on March 11th or 12th, right? In that first couple of weeks, we did see some little drop in some response rates. And we definitely saw, as I said, the responses that we were getting back sometimes were complaining that how dare we ask for money, okay? As opposed to, we got less take me off your list, but more, how dare you ask us for money? But the response rates were down a little bit, right? Same thing on the telephone, okay? And I'm talking about that all of our clients, we suspended all prospecting activities with the exception of one client, but we started first with our donor base. And with our donors on the phone, we saw a little bit of a drop in the conversion rates, but that has fully come back by April. It fully came back. So our online experience with our donors and our telephone experience with our donors, right, has come back to the same response rates, the same average gifts. We are hitting, in some cases, exceeding, right, our projections for those activities. On mail, as I said, we were a bit skittish. We wanted to start with the phone and the, to spend, $50,000 or $100,000 on a mailing and bomb. I did have a few clients that we had mailed right at the beginning of March, and it was too late. We had already printed it and was ready to go at the post office, so away it went. So I did have, I'd say, a couple of our clients had lower response rate to their donor mailing, but some of our clients, right, almost no difference. So, you know, in terms of action, if you're an organization that deals with large, small dollar donors, right? And you haven't tested your feet in the water, my advice is start with email, make a few phone calls, get comfortable, see how it's doing. And then if it's doing well, and I suspect at this point it will do well, but again, don't be tone deaf, okay? And acknowledge you know, that these are trying times and that people are struggling from a health and economic perspective. But if you do it in an effective way, all of our clients now, right, are on target to achieve their May numbers. So I can tell you that the fundraising environment is fine for small donors right now. Not prospecting, but donors.
Right. Kevin, I'll come to you on, Ray, I'll come back to you on the, I'm looking at time. I'll come back to you on the major gift questions next, but I will ask Kevin about the small dollar stuff, especially because he's had so much background in direct mail.
Well, I don't have much to add to Michael other than yes, you can never make assumptions about donors and you just have to test. And, you know, I bet everybody on this call has experienced that for whatever reason, everybody believes they're an expert on fundraising. Everybody. I would never venture to try to fix my car. I have no idea at this point how it works, and I would get an expert to do it. But for some reason, anybody you talk to, a volunteer activist, a board member, a family member, they all think, you know, it's not rocket science. This is what you should do, right? We get inundated with thousands of great ideas. Have you ever thought about asking rich people for money? Have you ever thought about, you know, crazy stuff like that? But the challenge is, as everybody knows who's experienced this, that most fundraising and marketing technology is actually counterintuitive and not intuitive. And so just like a long fundraising letter frequently outperforms a short fundraising letter. Well, that makes no sense, right? But how do we know that? Because we kept testing it. And so you just gotta let the marketplace speak. I mean, it's the same thing in the economy, right? Do government bureaucrats know better, or do consumers at the front lines know better? And it's the same thing. You have to keep testing and never presume.
Kevin, one of your exchange calls talked about people making assumptions in 2008, 2009 when we had the downturn.
And they missed a huge opportunity to prospect. Yeah. And, you know, if you're not prospecting, you're not growing. Now, if you're not getting prospecting results, you may want to suspend. But to just suspend because you're on a hunch that it's not going to work is very imprudent. I know that a number of groups that you'll work with the firm Next After, which is based in Dallas. In fact, we've got them on a call again tomorrow, Tim Kucheriak. And, you know, he just constantly tests, both online especially, but also direct mail, and then shares that. And you know, it comes in trends. It's amazing. But the more you're testing, the more you're going to succeed.
But
Troy, can I just quickly comment on something?
Sure, absolutely.
Just that I agree. And one of the things we did with our clients is we went back and looked at the crash from 2008, 2009 on performance on activities. And we work with the majority of the center-right political parties in this country, right? And they all did so well during that time, okay? And that made them feel more comfortable that just because there's an economic problem does not correlate to how performance on fundraising.
Okay, I'm gonna jump to large dollar stuff now. I'll come to you first, Ray, because you touched on this earlier when you talked about reaching out to some of your key donors. I guess we're curious, and I think this will continue for some time, as there's some hesitancy about getting together, having a lot of meetings in person, especially with some of the older folks in that community. What has your experience been that way? And talk a bit about maybe even asking for money virtually, because that's a different dynamic, because we've learned how to do this in person, and that's a different dynamic, obviously, than doing it over Zoom or doing it over a phone, etc. So
our model is very much based on the larger, you know, mostly 5-figure and some 6-figure gifts is what we focus on. And that's relationship rather than, mail and all the rest. And typically we would see in person most of our major donors anywhere between 2 and 5 times a year, or 2 and 6 times a year. Some of them is our most major ones on an every other month. Now that's either a visit or they're attending an event, but there's actually a in-person touch. That obviously, so we've done 2 things. One, developed a particular newsletter with that community in mind that I'm writing and sending every week, which is a curation of half a dozen news sources, a 250-word just thoughts to leaders, a couple of data points. And that has, the click rate and the open rate on that has been very, very high. So it's a value add. We don't shill any of our own stuff. It's sort of, it's sort of a sharing of the thoughts that if I was in person at a meeting, the sort of conversation we'd likely be having about the news or what's going on and perspectives. Because a lot of times your donors value you because of the networks and perspectives that you bring, not just because of what you do. So we've tried to replicate that on a more frequent touch basis. Obviously, we are calling very regularly. We have not yet done any in-person visiting. We're waiting to see what the rollout is going to be. I do worry if the year unfolds and we're not able before the end of the year in terms of the assets, in terms of what that means. On the other hand, in the last 2 weeks, I've had 6 new donors who've never given to us before all give 5 and 1 6-figure gift. Brand new relationships that were cultivated in response to some stuff we were doing COVID, and some of the partnerships were there, and one heard about it and a little bit of a network. So but these were relationships I did not have at all, and managed to bring it to delivery with 6 new gifts in a couple. So it is possible. I think there are some particular circumstances around it. I don't think that will become the norm. But I also don't think, to your point, let's not assume that we know about the donors or the answers. They too are recognizing the rules have changed about everything, and the fact that, they may not want you to be, especially some of our more elderly donors and who are concerned from a health perspective, they may be a little more reluctant to meet with us than we are eager to meet with them. And may go out of their way actually in terms of not wanting that physical meeting. So I think it's going to be nuanced. It's going to be very much geared to knowing your own connections and the relationships that you have with them.
Right. Come to you on that, Kevin, because I participated in one of your discussions where Ben Case actually did a presentation specific to the virtual ask. I thought there was a bunch of interesting material in that, but better you to summarize it than me, or some of the key points.
Well, I would just say broadly, just a couple of points. First and foremost, separate from COVID, at the end of the day, there aren't that many differences between small dollar donors and major donors. There are donors who want to advance your mission. They want to solve big problems. They're just doing it in different ways. And I would also suggest, I think we all know that the major strategy that affects our fundraising is what many people refer to as the donor pipeline. That if you look at most major donors, they actually started as $100 donors or $500 donors, but after 5, 8 years where they saw more about what you're able to achieve, where you built more trust with them, where they understood you better, where you established a stronger partnership, then, and maybe also as their financial situation grew in their lives, they then looked at, a $25,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 or $1 million annual gift or special gift. And then, of course, ultimately, it's that estate gift, which is in many ways defining their life. If they say, well, gee, your solution to the problem is something I feel so good about, and I've accumulated these assets in my life, and I've taken care of my family, I want to make sure that you are advanced even further. And I want that to be my life. And I don't even necessarily mean in terms of public recognition, although for some people that is the case. But it's, I want to feel like I made a major difference in finding a cure for cancer, or for dealing with addiction, or dealing with the principles of free enterprise, or whatever it may be in that way. And then again, the whole model of human action still applies in motivating a gift, whether it's a $5 online gift just like that, or a $100 direct mail gift, or it is $1 million major gift. But I'm not going to go into much detail. I would just strongly recommend Ben Case's superior presentation. I think it's about 20 slides. I could put my email address in the chat, and I'd be glad to send the links to it, as well as the Tim Kucheriak information. And I'll even, if you want to get these regular fundraising tips or join these calls, Troy, they can use that email address too. But I'd be glad to send it. The Ben Case presentation is superb. Step by step, how to prepare, how to get do the ask virtually. And to Ray's point, you know, we have many of the donors, obviously. The average age of a major donor per donor has been 72 years for 30 years, right? They weren't frozen at that point in their life. They didn't have more ability and time to give, and yet they're going to be the ones most leery about taking a meeting. So we've got to find alternatives. But again, back to that point earlier, if you're the one who jumps into that innovation space and you're making the calls virtually while the others are sort of frozen and not acting, then you're taking advantage of that all the more.
Right. We're losing you a bit on the audio there, Kevin. Hopefully, anyway, we'll come back to you. But I want to ask the question a little bit of an offbeat question. Of course, there's a lot of supports that have been made available for organizations during this time from the government. Of course, our friends on the left were quick to gobble everything up and then some without any concern about doing so. But I wonder if groups, organizations on our side, what has been the experience in the US, in Canada, in our conversations? And in fact, I've had conversations with people that said they've actually used not taking a penny from government during this time, even though it's on the table, as a fundraising tool to actually raise more by saying that we're not relying on any government support during this time. Maybe Michael, I'll start with you because you've probably had conversations around different clients and client groups. And are you finding are there any observations on that front that you found or discovered?
Well, I think, that, our business is really divided into two areas, working with us, center-right political parties and the conservative movement. And then we have a large not-for-profit business that, well, we're certainly not working for left-wing charities, but working for healthcare organizations and organizations that work with the vulnerable. So I can tell you with our not-for-profits, right, that some of them, right, especially the ones who work with the vulnerable who've been affected and have seen a huge increase in demands. And we work with one organization here in Toronto that they've seen that from a social service perspective, demands of people who've lost their job and need help with housing and help with paying their rent. And we've have seen increases in domestic violence because of the shut-in nature and all the stress that's happening. So they've seen an increase in the demand for their services, and they have been working very closely with government because of the increased demand for the work that they've done. They've been trying to work to get government funding. Now, as I said, with our political clients and with our center-right conservative movement clients, as I said, almost none of them have seen, I'm not even sure they qualify for any of the programs because they haven't really seen a drop off in revenue. Like when you're dealing with the small donors, as I said, we really haven't seen a major drop off in revenue. So therefore, I'm not even sure they're eligible to qualify for the government programs. So from a philosophical perspective, I know that, looking to government to solve the problem is probably something that's, hard for them to do and usually not on their radar. So, but I'm not aware of any of them that are reaching out to do that at this point. They may be, but I'm not aware of it. But I can tell you that I'm not even sure which programs they would qualify at this point.
Right.
Most of our clients.
Ray, do you have any thoughts on that? And then I'm curious what the experience has been with groups in the United States.
Yeah, I think certainly, I wouldn't have any hesitation in terms of if you qualify to take the wage subsidy or whatever as an example of good stewardship, and to your donors as well. But I wouldn't. That would be incidental in the overall response. I think you turn over every stone, and if it's there and you legitimately qualify, by all means. One of the things we have focused on is in terms of attempting to shape the government response. And we've done that by saying, particularly in the not-for-profit and charitable sector, rather than creating a fund and applications in terms of who's there, why don't go to market-driven mechanisms like charitable tax giving itself and increase the, allow the rank and file ordinary Canadian to choose where the needs are and who are the organizations that are closest to the needs that are best equipped to respond to those needs, and support those organizations rather than having it all funneled through government, and encourage that either by some matching system, and as you do whenever there's an earthquake or a tsunami, we have a matching sort of system, or just increase the charitable tax credit along the way and allow Canadians. It's far more efficient in terms of responding to the very real frontline needs that are there. And let's trust the common sense of ordinary Canadians who see that need and have big hearts and will respond. Let's let those dollars go further. So our focus has been very much a policy focus, right, in terms of saying, instead of creating the super fund for charities like you've created the super fund for big business and the loan fund for small business and that, we don't need another fund per se. Let's deliver that through tax credits in the tax system. Right. And so we have really focused our efforts on that, which I think is a market. It's a solution. It's an efficient solution, and ultimately reflects conservative values far better than sort of the centralized government administrative relief.
Kevin, have groups in the U.S. used this as a tool? I've actually seen some stuff that says, look, we're not taking any of this, we're not involving ourselves, and using that as a motivator with the donor community or otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly worth throwing out there are plenty of negative consequences attached with taking support from government, because it can further entrap them into more regulation, and which is, as we've increasingly seen, even encroaches on regulating their freedom of expression and freedom of speech. So I would say those we work with, we look more favorably upon those who have decided not to go that route. And I think also, just as we've been discussing this entire call, there are lots of opportunities to continue to receive voluntary contributions from people who have created value for society, and as a result have taken the fruits of their labor and are looking for us to help advance these ideas. So just sort of stay in that space.
Okay, Colin, I was coming to you eventually. I wonder if you can summarize maybe one question, because I do have a final, very quick round robin to finish with, and I want to get to that at about 5 to the top of the hour to keep.
Sure. Okay, we've got an interesting question here. I don't think I've heard it really discussed, but have there been any success stories when it comes to holding virtual fundraising events in place of actual in-person fundraising events? Any advice on that?
I'll tell a story about one of our clients that I work with. They have a huge need associated because of the economic downturn associated with COVID, and they decided to launch a $85 million campaign to raise money for. They normally raise $60 million. They wanted to raise $85 million to deal with the crisis. So they did. They raised 19 million of the additional 25 from their top donors, all doing virtual asks where they had over Zoom. They were able to raise $19 million in 1 week from a variety of large existing donors, right? To do that. And then I was on a Zoom call with donors who had given $10,000 to $100,000 with 800 participants on the Zoom. Maybe it was 800, but I think there was 800 participants on the Zoom call. And there was no direct ask. The case for support was laid out very clearly, There was some prominent leaders in the community on that, making a presentation as to why it was so important that we did. And after the call, unsolicited, they raised $2 million.
Wow. I have to get those lists from you, Michael.
Yeah. No, I'm not taking credit for any of that, by the way. I sit on their board, so I'm not taking a credit for that.
So Ray, on the, I get, Colin, just going back to that question, it was on the event side, right? On the more of the.
Yes, yeah, doing a virtual fundraising event instead of an in-person event.
Yeah, okay. Ray, do you have anything on that?
There are a couple of charities I support. I'm not in the leadership of presently, but who are attempting, they relied on an annual, major golf tournament and auction sort of thing. And that I see several of that moving online. So that's in process right now. I don't know the extent to which it will match previous successes. But as especially organizations that rely on a calendar of regular events in which a significant proportion of their revenue are there, they're having to think in terms of how to replace those events with other, because those become the occasions for giving in the pattern. And so I'm seeing some evidence of that being thought about, but I haven't seen nor directly participated in that to have a concrete example of results.
Kevin?
Just Stand Together, the organization I work with, has been working on one particular thing called Give Together Now, which is working through a group called the Family Independence Initiative, and they get money directly into the hands of people that are immediately in need, that have been thrown out of work or in dire need as a result of the government's response to COVID. And they've been able so far to help over 90,000 families. I think it's $500 a pop that they immediately are able to set up to give. So they've raised so far, I think it's $45 million, mostly through online, after a whole mixture of different things. Not one specific event, although they have had several events, Facebook Live, just being creative. And again, it goes right back to the Mises model of human action. If you can frame it up in that way, where people see the need, see the solution, and see how they can be a part of it, it still works.
That's good. Okay, and that leads to our final sort of round robin question, which, Kevin, you brought up the issue of creativity several times. We have, all of us, I'm sure, seen very new, clever, innovative things during this crazy time that we've never seen before. Can each of you maybe share one example, either whether it's a story, a practice, a new idea that's really stuck with you and said, okay, that's clever, and it's going to apply down the road going forward. I don't know who wants to start with that. Go ahead, Kevin, if you're.
I'll just jump in and say I don't have anything beyond the Crazy Fox story. That it's hard to beat that. But I think it's actually the use of things like Zoom. If you think about it, you think about business travel, which is obviously going to be tremendously affected by COVID for a long, long time, maybe forever, right? And I think a lot of people have been wondering, do I really need to go visit some person for this? I guess I do, because if I don't, somebody else will. And I know a lot of businesses feel that way. Do I really have to go across the country? That travel is physically and emotionally and psychologically draining. It takes time. It's financially costly. And so on the one hand, sure, there's no replacement for in-person. But on the other hand, if we can figure out creative ways to do this, think about this, just as you're doing right here. We many times struggle to have a really great speaker for a conference.
Right.
Imagine if you're able to create a setting where you have 2 or 3 phenomenal speakers, because for them, it's just 30 minutes or an hour out of their day, as opposed to a 3-day commitment to fly to your gathering, stay there, and fly back. I think those are the things that are going to really shake it up, are shaking it up. And the sooner any of us on this call get ahead of it, the better. So that we're, the early adapters to it rather than the followers.
Great.
I think Kevin's right. I think there is, on the one hand, we're seeing some of the pluses and looking at, all the costs of travel and everything and weighing, do we really get the value add over it? I also think we're seeing the downsides, and I think the future is going to be a hybrid in terms of, seeing the gaps and the things that we're not able to achieve right now, as well as the new ways of trying to do it in a COVID-friendly manner, if you will. I think, when I take a look at our organization, there are new patterns that have been there. Everything from, I mentioned our Friday call. I mentioned, there's a fun thing that a bunch of employees have done in terms of sort of the Friday final, new internal sort of communications that are designed to invest in the culture. A lot of stuff that happened informally in a workplace just because you were all together every day and you didn't really need to plan it. Some of it just happened. Now there is a conscious and an intentionality, and I think we'll be able to do some of that stuff better coming back, largely as well because we missed some of the human interaction. And I think that's both internal and external. So I think one of the big lessons, in the same way as people are talking about, family lives and eating meals together and how people are rediscovering and playing board games and doing stuff within the family unit, within the institutional units, within our organizations, I think there are similar lessons being learned. And I don't think it's black and white. I think there's some things we're really missing. There's some things we're learning to do differently and better. And the new world is going to be a hybrid of both of them.
Okay, and I'll just kind of bookend it. So I in the beginning I talked about the opportunity for building communities. So I'm going to finish with an example of, to me, when people say, "What have you learned so far during this?" That what's the most interesting thing that you've learned during this process? So we had one client who the board was adamant that they did not want to fundraise at all during this time. They felt it was inappropriate, and they suspended all fundraising. Eventually, we convinced the board to try something, and here's what we ended up doing, and it's had a phenomenal impact on this organization. What we did is we actually used the telephone where we reached out to all of the donors to that organization, where we called to ask them how they're doing, right? The purpose of the call, it was early on in the pandemic. The purpose was to say, we want to make sure you've always been there for us. We want to be there for you. All right, are you okay? And we asked them, we said, would you like to, if you're not okay, would you like to have a volunteer in your area come and connect with you and see how we can help you? And we lastly, obviously the vast majority of the people said they were okay and they did not need help. And when they said that they were okay, we then asked, would you be interested in being a volunteer to help those people, right, who are looking for help, right? So not surprisingly, we had way more people want to volunteer to help people than needed help, and a good problem. And I can tell you that at the Zoom call, 3 days after the test, right, one of the board members who was so adamant that it's a terrible idea to be talking to any of the donors at this point, right? He told the story that his wife is a donor and got the call, right? And his wife loved the call and is now a volunteer. So I can tell you, they took a problem and they turned it into an opportunity to build a community with their supporters who have been there forever for them. And they turned it around and has made such a difference in the culture of that organization. So that's a good thing for me to close on.
That's a great story, Michael. Thank you so much. Hey, thank you to everyone who participated today, to our speakers, to Colin, thank you. Please, I'll send a note to our panelists. If you have any links, Kevin, you mentioned the link for Ben and Tim. And I'll also send a recording to those that registered for this to you as well. We will be back next month. We're going to keep going with these the week of June 8th, and I'll have an announcement out on what our topics will be for that week. Again, thank you to everyone, and we're right on the top of the hour, which is perfect. So everyone stay safe, take care. Thank you, and we'll be back. Bye for now.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.